That's important. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Oh, wait, that's 21.
No, she is the discussion. At the end.
Dat is wat ik zeg.
At the end. Not the speaker.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we can start, but still closing the door only in the. Yeah. Okay, let's close the door. Then we can start.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, distinguished panelists, colleagues, and friends. It is my great honor to welcome you to this important event co-organized by the International Association for the Advancement of Innovative Approaches to Global Challenges, the IAAI, and the United Nations Studies Association, UNSA, with the support of the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica. Today, we not only commemorate a milestone, the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, but we also reaffirm our collective commitment to one of the most enduring legacies, which is the pursuit of gender equality and justice in all spheres of life. As we reflect on 3 decades of progress, we gather at a critical intersection of global challenges where the climate crisis, social inequities, and the need for robust crime prevention and criminal justice systems converge. The impacts of change are not gender neutral.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we have an arrow.
List of participants is not known.
Okay. Okay, so as I was saying, the impacts of climate change are not gender neutral. Women, girls, and marginalized communities are disproportionately bearing the strain of environmental degradation, displacement, and conflict realities that can increase their vulnerability to crime, exploitation, and violence. This is why today's dialogue is so important, and it's a call to action to ensure that our climate responses are not only environmentally sound, but also grounded in justice, equity, and human rights. Gender-responsive approaches to climate policy that integrate crime prevention and promote access to justice, especially for those most at risk, must be fostered. And by advocating for gender-responsive policies that prioritize equity and inclusion, we aim to support not only sustainable development, but also the broader goals of justice, security, and resilience in communities facing climate-induced challenges. Thank you all for joining in this discussion, and particularly to our distinguished panelists for being part of this important conversation. So with no further ado, once hearing the bell ring, let me introduce our first panelists. I would like first to welcome Mr. 𝗕𝗲𝗃𝗏𝗄, founder and CEO of the International Association of Advancement of Innovative Approaches to Global Challenges, and also the Strategic Director of Climate Change Coalition, the leading multi-stakeholder network of experts in the field of blockchain for climate action. Mr. 𝗕𝗲𝗃, you have the floor, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's really such a pleasure and honor to organize and to co-host today's event with you on advancing gender-responsive climate solutions for a sustainable and just future. As a co-host of the event, I would first like to say thank you in particular to Orania Roditi, our team member, who has approached us and said, we need to bring this new topic, this new perspective to the UN Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. We've had a really very important initiatives in the past led by our esteemed president, Michael Platzer. He is the president of IAAI, the International Association for the Advancement of Innovative Approaches to Global Challenges. And now we are here to really look at this gender perspective on climate solutions, because climate change is the defining challenges of our time, and climate change is changing everything. And in this rapid disruptive transformations, as you mentioned, women and girls are very often disproportionately affected negatively. And so we really, in light of this SDG 16, peace, prosperity, peace and just, full and inclusive society, we have really to look how the governmental stakeholders together with non-state actors can find solutions that will really master this big transformation. And our organization is having 3 pillars. First, the goal is to get everyone everywhere actively engaged in global challenges action. So the main challenge is climate, but we have also the Sustainable Development Goals in general as our compass. And in general, really to translate it down to the needs and to the cognitive structures of the people on the ground, we say it's about work collaborating for the common good on the local level with a global framework. And this, we are building an ecosystem, some kind of next generation of the United Nations system for all of society engagement. So where the non-state actors have also a prominent role. And there we have culture as a key pillar, and we have technology, these emergent technologies, especially blockchain and AI, Internet of Things, Earth observation, and also organizational innovation with a strong focus on resource mobilization. And so I'm just telling you this information to present ourselves as bridge builders. So we have been here very strong with Michael and Urania in the Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, but we are also very active in the UNFCCC process. Here I'm very proud that 𝗕𝗲𝗃𝗲𝗿 from the Austrian Ministry of Agriculture and Climate is joining us today, because we have worked in the field of action for climate empowerment in the past very successfully, and we are going to do this again. And we are also active at the UN Oceans Conference and also in the Science, Technology and Innovation Fora. And Costa Rica is a leader in the UN Ocean Conference, co-chairing the conference in 3 weeks, and also co-chairing these UN dialogues on AI governance. So there's a lot of potential, and really today's event is very important for us. We are happy, and I would like to extend also my gratitude to the UN Studies Association Vienna with Narika and Lisa for being here, helping us, and also for the support of the Alliance of NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice and the NGO Committee on the Status of Women in Vienna. It's good that we work together. Together we are stronger, and wishing everyone a good event.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Polzer. We will now listen to a recorded video message on gender responsive policies and the intersection of climate and crime prevention and gender transformative responses. The video is by Mrs. Elisa Morguera, Special Rapporteur on Climate Change since 2024. She's also a distinguished professor of global environmental law at the University of Strathclyde and an adjunct professor at the University of Eastern Finland. From 2019 to 2024, she directed One Ocean Hub, a global collaboration supporting fair and inclusive ocean decision-making. So let's watch the video.
Climate change exacerbates vulnerabilities, exposing women and girls to exploitation, violence, and displacement, including modern forms of slavery such as human trafficking, forced marriage, and domestic servitude. I welcome, therefore, this opportunity to reflect with you on the gender responsive policies and measures that we need at the intersection of climate and climate prevention. And I would also offer a few words about gender transformative responses. In terms of gender responsive approaches, we have significant guidance from UN Special Rapporteurs that could be relied upon. For instance, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Trafficking has clarified that states must, in the context of climate change, recognize and effectively prevent the increased risks of exploitation faced by internally displaced women and girls, and take effective protection for them, including in host communities. States also need to integrate measures to prevent human trafficking arising in the context of climate change in their action plans, programs, and measures relating to women and girls. And in planned relocations, we also need to think about the need for training, for instance, for relief workers, to be able to protect women and girls, with particular attention also to older women, with a view to decrease the risk of violence, exploitation, and abuse during climate-induced disasters. The Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls has also recommended ensuring that those whose claims for protection arise from sudden or slow onset climate events should have access to fair and efficient refugee status determination procedures to assess their needs for international protection, including on multiple grounds. There have also been recommendations about adopting temporary protection arrangements for women and girls and any other pragmatic arrangements to provide protection for women and girls that are forcibly displaced in the context of climate change or other environmental degradation that is also worsened by climate change. And it is essential to integrate risk mitigation in the context of violence against women and girls and gender differentiated impacts into early warning, preparedness, and disaster reduction strategies. Particular attention needs to be paid to indigenous women and girls in the context of climate change, making sure that climate action on their territories only occurs with their effective participation, including full respect for their free, prior, informed consent, adequate consultation processes, and also fair and equitable sharing of any benefits arising from their knowledge and other contributions. It is essential to integrate and incorporate the knowledge of indigenous women and girls into decision-making on climate change, including technical panels, environmental and sociocultural impact assessment. And there again, there needs to be fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from their knowledge. If we think, however, also in terms of gender transformative measures, this is where we really need to think not only on the vulnerability that women and girls may face in the context of climate change, but also their leadership, their role as agents of change, and their unique insights and understanding that are essential to protect everyone's human rights in the context of climate change. So the Special Rapporteur on the human right to a healthy environment, for instance, recommended the states take action, including temporary specific measures, to empower women and girls as climate leaders, specifically addressing barriers to their participation in those processes. It's also essential to take specific measures to ensure the meaningful participation of migrant and displaced women and girls in the development, implementation, and monitoring of policies designed to prevent human trafficking in the context of climate displacement. And finally, adopting gender risk analysis, not only for monitoring and evaluation, but also for learning from climate mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage responses. And those monitoring, evaluation, and learning approaches should be co-designed with the full and effective participation of women and girls, as well as their participation in implementation, and that the use of the learning in relation to climate action at all levels. While many of these measures are more facilitative and preventive in nature, I'm really keen to hear from you and the other experts in this event how you see the contributions of crime prevention and crime prevention approaches to these issues. So I look forward to staying connected in the next steps after this event.
Well, thank you so much to Mrs. 𝗲𝗲𝗃𝗃. We appreciate this valuable contributions. I would now like to invite Mrs. 𝗲𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, co-founder of the Gender Project for Bulgaria Foundation, later renamed the Center for Sustainable Communities Development, the CSCD, which has run over 100 projects under her leadership. She represents the CSCD in Bulgaria's National Council on Gender Equality, and I would like to invite her to share her views on climate change and gender injustice. Mrs. 𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. Do you hear me well?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Okay. So I wonder how to change the slide now.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
You can, the first,
Ask me, I can
Yeah.
change the slides for you.
Okay, thank you. So these are the 4 directions, topics I would like very shortly to touch, from climate change issue towards climate change justice, the impact of climate change on women, and the solutions, women's solutions to challenges and some mitigation strategies. Thank you. The first one now.
Yeah.
So the climate crisis exacerbates, we already heard about that, inequality, intensifies poverty, and plunged the world's most marginalized populations into heightened insecurity. Advocating for climate justice means putting equity and human rights at the core of climate action and decision making. It means holding accountable the countries, industries, businesses, and people that are emitting large amounts of greenhouse emissions and are therefore contributing more to the crisis than those who are disproportionately affected by it, namely vulnerable countries and communities like women, children, LGBTIQ individuals, people with disabilities, minorities, and indigenous people. Next one. So, the second topic, the impact on women. During climate disasters, the vulnerability of women intensifies and the proliferation of diseases occurs, with childbirth becoming more dangerous and with a greater risk of fatality for both the mother and the child. As food becomes scarce due to insufficient rainfall, women often sacrifice their nutrition to feed their families. Women also bear the brunt of water scarcity, facing dangers of long journeys in search of clean water during droughts. This exposes them to heightened risks such as sexual assault, harassment, and human trafficking. The domestic sphere is not exempt from dangers, with gender-based violence rates including domestic violence. Fleeing from flooded homes, they seek shelter in informal urban settlements, commonly referred to as urban slums, living in uncertain and also vulnerable conditions. Next. I would like now to illustrate gender aspects of climate change with 2 examples. The first is extractivism impact that was provoked fully by people, and the second one will be about migration. So, extractivism is an we all know, economic model based on removing natural resources and raw materials such as minerals, oil, or gas on a massive scale for export. And it is an economic model created by men. Women are excluded from decision-making in extractive industries and places where the climate, environment, rights, and security agendas are set. Extractivism disrupts traditional or indigenous ways of life, culture, art, economic systems, customs, beliefs, and traditions. And for indigenous communities, land is more than a physical location. It is a sacred ground where ancestors are buried, and the loss of land can be experienced as emotional, psychological, and even spiritual abuse. Next one, please.
Yes.
In addition, loss of income and resources, displacement, and humanitarian crisis may result in increased rates of gender-based violence, including sex trafficking, as we already heard, and harmful practices such as early marriage and forced unions. The concentration of male workforce in mining and in the linked transport sector goes hand in hand with increased sexual exploitation of women and girls, health risks like HIV and gender-based violence. The presence of public forces, such as military and law enforcement or private security forces tasked with guarding extractive activity sites, is often associated with higher level of gender-based violence perpetrated by male workers. The next, please. So, two additional type of violence, economic violence. Women experience multiple forms of it, from extractive industry, starting with the fact that they are less likely to own or control land than men. It can include the confiscation of land, crops, access to forests, non-payment of wages, human trafficking, forced labor, and exploitation of domestic and reproductive labor. But there are also political violence, consists of threats, attacks, and intimidation by the state, corporations, security forces, politicians, media, and other elites, often working together or as part of a chain of economic and political interests. Repression can target individual women or women's groups, social movements, and institutions in which women play a leading role. Next one. What about the impact on induced migration? Different migration patterns exist, encompassing both short and long distances, and these patterns impact men and women and gender minority groups differently. Women undertaking migration journeys confront a set of vulnerabilities arising from factors such as gender, age, disability, ethnicity or race, and parental status. This exposes them to various forms of violence, exploitation, and abuse, encompassing issues such as, again, human trafficking, sexual harassment, and forced labor. Insufficient access to critical resources compounds the challenges faced by women on migration journey. This includes the limited availability of sanitation facilities, hygiene products, sexual and reproductive health care, as well as general healthcare services. Next. What about women's solutions? It is imperative to leverage the expertise of women across various domains. Women play pivotal roles in agriculture, biodiversity conservation, household management, income generation, and politics. That's why it is crucial to recognize their proactive engagement in developing adaptation strategies. So it's important not to look at women only as victims, but also as agents of change. While acknowledging the vulnerability of women, it is equally important to underscore their role as key contributors to sustainable solutions. Next, please. Women's participation in decision-making is important not only in politics, but very important in the communities as well. Women need leadership training, but women-led initiatives also need financing. Gender equality interventions must address the structural barriers embedded in norms, laws, and policies contributing to inequality.
It's part of the game.
To enhance the capacity.
No, it's fine. It just doesn't seem like the kind of music you would like, that's all.
I'm sorry, there is one additional voice. To enhance the capacities of women and their communities to advocate for their rights and interests, Feminist leaders should come together across movements to make sure that excluded voices are heard. Next one. Next one slide, please. And my proposal for some mitigation strategies: work on climate crisis prevention, first of all. Avoid migration caused by climate change. Women's voice to be heard at the tables and international events dedicated to climate change. Work on the issue at a personal, first of all, personal. We have to change ourselves personally, first of all, and then locally and global level. Data collection to be improved. Impact documenting in crisis and critical analysis to be done. Collective action to be mobilized. Women's economic empowerment activities to be financed. Working with the young generations through education. And the last slide, I would quote Mary Robinson, former UN climate envoy, once she stated, "Climate change is a man-made problem and must have a feminist solution." Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hajmitova. Our next panelist is Mrs. Rita Maria 𝗓𝗲𝗃𝗲, a fellow Costa Rican and former diplomat, and currently the director of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, 𝗥4NNP, a 120-country alliance working to protect 30% of the planet's land and ocean by 2030, and winner of the 2024 Earthshot Prize. Mrs. 𝗓𝗲𝗃𝗲, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency, fellow panelists, distinguished delegates. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. And I want to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to participate and share a little bit of the work that we do with a lens of biodiversity. Next slide, please. So, as was mentioned by the ambassador, the coalition is an intergovernmental group of 120 countries launched in 2021, co-chaired by Costa Rica and France, and has been at the center of the international negotiations, particularly in the Convention on Biological Diversity and in the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It's a mouthful, so I would continue on saying GBF for making it easier. This GBF was adopted back in December 2022, providing a bit of a framework of the work that should be done from now until 2030. Climate change and environmental degradation, biodiversity loss are reshaping our world. Yet these crises do not affect all people equally. Women and girls are impacted in a disproportionate manner, as floods displace families, drought destroy crops, and forests are lost to illegal logging and mining. It is often women who bear the burden. Their exposure to exploitation, gender-based violence, and displacement increases as resources become scarce and governance weakens. But let us be clear, and it has been said several times today, women are not merely victims of environmental crises. They are powerful stewards of the natural world, central to the solution we seek. In order to enable women to fulfill their potential, we must put in place policies and frameworks. And this is why I started today with the mention of the GBF. I wanted to share with you the work that has been done within the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is the sphere that we mainly work on. In this slide that you see in front of you, there are the 23 targets that were adopted during the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And I highlighted there Target 3 and Target 23. Target 3 is the one related to protection of marine and terrestrial areas, which is the one that we mainly focus on. And Target 23 is the one related to gender. It's important to remember that the whole 23 targets are interconnected, and the role of women as custodians of biodiversity is so-called cross-cutting element of the entire GBF.
No, I didn't put them off.
Next slide, please. I wanted to emphasize this slide so you can have the full language specifically on Target 23, where there's mention to ensuring gender equality in the implementation of the framework through a gender-responsive approach, where all women and girls have equal opportunities and capacities to contribute to the Convention's objectives. Another element that I would like to highlight and emphasize is that this was the first time that a Rio Convention adopted a target on gender equality with a strong global gender plan of action to support the GBF effective implementation at national, local, and international level. And hopefully this will set precedent for other Rio Conventions and other MEAs. But of course, it's crucial not only to have adopted the target, but to accompany it with strong gender plan of action. Agreements without concrete implementable actions are only agreements. Some of the key elements of the gender action plan, and next slide please, are the following. The first one related to promoting initiatives aimed at achieving gender equality and empowerment of women and girls to ensure the effective implementation of the GBF. The second one is related to providing technical and financial assistance for the implementation of the Gender Action Plan. Third, the synergies between gender equality and conservation, sustainable use, and fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Fourth, on the coherence with the 2030 Agenda. And lastly, on the recognition of the role of Indigenous women and girls as game changer in biodiversity conservation. These elements are key for the upcoming years in order to ensure that women's role in biodiversity is not only recognized, but also supported and amplified. Across the globe, women are leading bold conservation efforts, and I would just like to mention one example, but there are 100 of different very good examples. In Kenya specifically, the Northern Rangelands Trust includes women rangers and Indigenous women who patrol vast landscapes, protect endangered wildlife, and mediate conflict amongst communities. Their presence has not only improved conservation outcomes, but also enhanced peace and security in the region. This story is not an anomaly. They are the foundation of a more inclusive, effective, and sustainable conservation movement. But they will only become the norm if we enact in a gender-responsive climate and biodiversity policies. And although international agreements have recognized the vital role of women in biodiversity action and call for their full and effective participation in the implementation, there is much more to be done. And I would like to highlight 4 main elements, and I'm very happy to see that previous speakers have also highlighted some of those elements. We need to ensure meaningful and effective and full participation of women and girls in the development of international processes and their implementation. Secondly, we need to strengthen disaggregated data collection on gender, environment, and crime to inform and develop targeted intervention. Third, we must ensure women's land and resources rights are legally recognized and protected. And fourth, we have to put in place enabling conditions, including the mobilization of adequate resources for the implementation of gender responsive actions during the mapping and designing of conserved areas. In closing, we must recognize the intersection of gender, climate, conservation, and crime prevention, not as a complexity to be managed, but as a powerful framework for transformative change. Valuing the role of women and girls in climate and biodiversity action and including them in the solutions is vital. If we are to fulfill the promise of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, meet our climate goal, the 2030 Agenda, we must put women and girls at the center of the equation of all efforts. Because when women lead, nature thrives. I look forward to the next steps and continuing on building the bridges and creating synergies amongst us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Älsa-Glur. Following Mr. Reinhold Galsmetter, who is currently serving as prosecutor of appeals counsel at the International Criminal Court, as well as focal point for environmental crimes. Founder of the Center for Climate Crime Analysis, the CCCA, where he formerly served as chairperson of the board of directors, among with other important responsibilities. Mr. Galsmetter will address the role of law enforcement mechanisms in promoting an intersectional approach to mitigating environmental destruction. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon from The Hague to Vienna. So, as announced, I'm a prosecutor at the International Court, where I work on some of the world's most serious crimes, like crimes against humanity and war crimes. Through this work, I've seen firsthand how deeply people suffer during conflict. But I've also seen that societies can recover, heal, and rebuild, even after the worst atrocities. But climate change and environmental destruction present a very different kind of challenge. If we fail to act now, the damage that we cause will be irreversible. This crisis doesn't just threaten people in faraway places or future generations. It affects us all, and it affects the very foundations of our civilization. And this realization changed the course of my work. I came to see climate change and environmental destruction as among the most urgent issues of our time, as the previous speaker has also already announced. Climate change is not driven by a single act or event, but by how we live, how we produce our food and energy, how our economies function, and how we structure our societies. Tackling climate change requires us to use every tool at our disposal and to do so in a way that is coordinated, inclusive, and intersectional. It's not just about cutting carbon emissions or switching to electric cars. It's about changing the systems that are driving climate change, and systems that are often rooted in inequality and exploitation. And one of the tools, which I don't think we're talking nearly enough, is law enforcement and justice. I believe that courts and law enforcement agencies have a critical role to play in responding to the climate crisis, which is a long-term problem. While politicians often think short-term, that is from one election cycle to the next, judges are independent. And this independence and impartiality, it releases them from the pressures of short-term political gain and from the influence of special interests of lobbies. At the same time, their decisions, their judgments are legally binding and they are enforceable. Now, while much of the world's greenhouse gas emissions and even environmental destructures are technically legal, a significant portion comes from illegal activity. Take, for example, deforestation. It accounts for roughly 12% of global greenhouse gas emissions, according to the IPCC. And in tropical regions that have the most deforestation, up to 95% of this deforestation and forest degradation is illegal because it violates domestic environmental or regulatory standards. And it is often also related to other crimes like corruption, financial crimes, human rights violations, etc. So despite this, law enforcement is weak. While laws exist, they are not sufficiently enforced. And this is because, in large part, because law enforcement authorities do not have access to the right data and support that they would need to implement and enforce the laws more effectively. This leaves a gap in the global response to the climate crisis. And this is why I have founded, and until recently have led, the Center for Climate Crime Analysis, or CCCA. So CCCA is a non-profit organization that has the aim to help law enforcement and the regulators to enforce laws more effectively that relate to climate change and environmental destruction. So CCCA works in three key ways. First, it gathers data, and it does so by partnering with a broad and diverse network of organizations and experts that includes technology experts, scientists, NGOs, grassroots communities, universities, and others. Second, it uses cutting-edge technology, including AI, to process the data, and indeed big data, and to analyze that against applicable legal standard. And third, it strategically shares actionable case files with law enforcement and regulatory authorities to help them enforce the law, but also with NGOs to support and trigger strategic litigation and advocacy. In the past years, CCCA has focused especially on illegal deforestation and methane emissions. But these environmental harms do not occur in isolation. They're driven by economic incentives, often linked to large corporations producing commodities such as beef, soy, or palm oil. And they have a direct impact on people, from indigenous communities losing their ancestral land, or sometimes workers trapped in slavery-like conditions. And that is why CCCA does not stop at identifying the wrongdoers. It also targets their supply chain actors and their financiers worldwide. And it works closely together with affected communities to hear their perspective, to help them seek justice, and to amplify their voices. Now, let me also share something about our current work here in the ICC. The Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC is developing a new policy on environmental crimes. A draft of this policy was issued last December for public consultation, and we are now finalizing it. This policy outlines how the ICC can use its current mandate under the Rome Statute to investigate and prosecute Rome Statute crimes that are committed by means of or that result in environmental destruction. Even if the Rome Statute, that is the ICC's legal framework, focuses primarily on people, environmental damage often directly harms human life. And this is because the natural environment is the very foundation of human life. When ecosystems are destroyed, people lose their homes, their health, and sometimes their lives. And this new policy also emphasizes its intersectional approach. That means it recognizes how certain communities identified on characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and others are disproportionately affected by environmental crimes. And it means that we are aiming to put those communities and their perspectives at the center of our response. I won't go into all of the details because there's not enough time for it, but I encourage you to read the draft and later to be part of our joint effort to implement this policy. In closing, I want to say this. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, it's a justice issue. And if we are serious about justice, we need to bring the full force of the law to bear on the systems that are driving climate change and environmental destruction. And we need to do so in a coordinated, integrated, and intersectional way. Law enforcement, of course, isn't the whole solution, but without using it effectively, we won't get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Metzer. Our next panelist is Veronica Brown, coordinator of Women Majors Group, which advocates to expand civic space and ensure the voices and needs of girls and women and gender diverse people are prioritized in the SDGs. Mrs. Brown, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this kind invitations and to the organizers for putting together this important event. As you mentioned, my name is Veronica Brown. I'm the coordinator of the Women's Major Group. We are a global open network of over 600 feminist and women's rights organizations that work to coordinate and elevate civil society voices within sustainable development processes. So we mobilize experts from the grassroots to the global level to advocate for policies on women's rights, bodily autonomy, climate and social justice, and Agenda 2030. And a fun fact, we're also founded at the 1992 Earth Rio Summit, which is the also where the Convention on Biological Diversity, where the colleague Rita was mentioning. And thank you. I love the framing that was given to us by the last speaker, Reinhold, around justice, because gender justice is climate justice. And indeed, climate issues are not environmental issues solely, but also issues of justice. we know that the climate crisis punishes those who did the least, and my colleagues have already gone over that. Women, and especially those from more marginalized communities, really bear the brunt of the climate crisis. We know that UNDP estimates that 80% of people displaced by climate crisis are women, and women are 14% more likely than men to die in climate-related disasters. But the harm, we can only count this harm in evacuations and death tolls. It really reaches our bodies and futures, and it fuels gender-based violence. It strips away sexual reproductive health services and rights, pushes girls into early marriage. And addressing these challenges requires a deeper understanding of how, and the previous colleagues have gone over some of these issues already, but how this climate crisis worsens existing vulnerabilities. And we can't just ignore these gender impacts because we risk erasing decades of progress that are already being eroded by the current crisis of democracy that we currently face ourselves in. And so we really need to focus on protecting sexual reproductive health and rights and tackling gender-based violence. And I think having a crime prevention lens is really a crucial part of a holistic response to this. Sorry, go back to the last slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about CSW 69 this year, and CSW, for those that may know, is the Commission on the Status of Women. It takes place every year at UN headquarters in New York, and it is the space where the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action is reviewed and actionized. So this year was the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which is the single biggest framework for achieving gender equality. And in this year's CSW 69, a political declaration was adopted by consensus, which is becoming harder and harder at the United Nations. So just want to, and I'm sure as you guys know, emphasize the importance of this being adopted. And this CSW 69 member states renewed their commitment to the full, effective, and accelerated implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and also adopted an action plan. And the quote that you see here in my presentation is part of that action plan. And one of the things that I really want to emphasize here is that member states have committed to not only making sure that girls, women, and gender diverse people are free from poverty and violence, enjoy full and equal decision-making power, but live in peace and security and have access to climate justice. So, we already have a framework to really go on this work. Next slide, please. So as many colleagues have mentioned, climate change continues to drive displacement and food insecurity and the loss of livelihoods, and it really worsens vulnerabilities to sexual reproductive health and right violations and gender-based violence. Climate is not gender neutral, as we have gone over, and when livelihoods collapse under climate stress through displacement and food scarcity and lost income, this is where predatory actors really exploit this vacuum, and it drives a lot of spikes in trafficking, in transactional sex, and other forms of gender-based violence. I think some of the quotes here are really important, and it's that every 1 degree rise in global temperature is associated with a 4.7% increase in intimate partner violence, and that increases as the degrees in global temperature increase, which we know we're not reaching the current goals at the moment. There are some really stark case studies, including the Haiti earthquake in 2010. Sexual assault rates in tent camps were 20% more higher than anywhere else in the country. And we have seen this pattern throughout other climate-related disasters. In Cyclone Nargis in Myanmar in 2008, surveys by Earth.org found that there was a 30% upsurge in domestic violence and a rise in alcohol-fueled assault. And then research by UNODC itself in 2024 found that detected trafficking victims up 25% in climate-related displacement, listed as a driver in this. So I think it's imperative to really make sure that when we're talking about policies towards protecting girls women and gender diverse people in climate-related disasters, that we're taking this into account, and again, placing a crime prevention lens to really make sure that there's a holistic approach to approaching this issue, which is becoming much more prevalent. Next, please. So as I said, there's a clear pattern between climate shocks and displacement and this increase in the risk of trafficking and gender-based violence. Next, please. And part of this is really linked to sexual and reproductive health and rights. So we know that, UNFPA reaches 14.7 million just in the last few years alone with sexual reproductive health care, but there's a 58% gap in humanitarian sexual and reproductive health and rights response. And right now, we're also facing a crisis of backlash in many global frameworks against sexual reproductive health and rights. And so this is, part of the response of a holistic response towards preventing gender-based violence and the violation of sexual and reproductive health and rights is ensuring that there is enough frameworks, funding, and that there's enough political commitment to protecting sexual and reproductive health and rights. Next. So we know that climate injustices fuel sexual and reproductive health and rights violations and the way that these are linked to other forms of gender-based violence. I want to very quickly go over a case study here on the Yanomami territories, and this is a case study from our partners, La Asociación of Sexual Reproductive Health and Rights in Barcelona. They have been working with partners and have identified some really striking case studies from the ground in terms of the ways that climate-related disasters are fueling sexual and reproductive health violence. So one of the case studies I'll go into is the Yanomami Indigenous Territory, which you might know is a big stretch of the Amazon rainforest that straddles Brazil and Venezuela. And since the 1980s, this area has been invaded by 𝗲𝗄𝗃𝗃𝗃, which are illegal gold miners. And their operations have caused, a big climate-related disaster there, from deforestation, mercury poisoned rivers, food insecurity. And these pressures have really magnified the effects and are threatening Yanomami lives and harming their sexual and reproductive rights. And we know especially that Indigenous people are particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate-related disasters. There have been several reports of sexual abuse of girls and adolescents in these mining zones by the illegal gold miners, forced child marriage, sexual assault of minors, including the death of 3 girls, about 13, who died after being repeatedly raped by drunk 𝗲𝗄𝗃𝗃𝗃. And so these are some of the real case studies on the ground.
Sorry, Veronica, to interrupt you. We have to look at the time as well because we only have until here. Maybe you can wrap it up quickly because we still have 2 speakers. It would be nice to have everyone speak.
Sure, I just have about 3 minutes left. Thanks, in the 7 minutes. Thank you. You can go into the next slide.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to very quickly go over, some of the work that already exists. This one is specifically on sexual and reproductive rights. I'm happy to share this presentation afterwards. But these are some of the frameworks and what the Women's Major Group focuses on in advancing these policies in multilateral spaces and linking these different processes so that there's coherence between policies and what countries can adapt inside their own national policies. And so we see a little bit just on where these policies to protect the lives of girls, women, and gender diverse people in climate disasters are showing up. Then next. So I just want to talk very briefly about the importance of civil society and civil society involvement in UN processes and in the Sustainable Development Agenda. We're 5 years from 2030, and there's a post-2030 agenda coming, and being able to promote policies that alleviate the pressures faced by girls, women, and gender diverse people in climate affected communities are an essential part of what we hope to achieve in the world post 2030 and what we're hoping to achieve in the last 5 years of 2030. And so these are examples of some of the civil society groups that bring together different actors and link the gender and the climate sectors together to work on these issues. Next slide, please. So finishing with a call to action, there's, as I said, the importance of bridging feminist and environmental movements and civil society is a crucial part of that, of strengthening narratives around this work for political impact. And we've heard a lot of this from colleagues already, and that we're doing this in a collaborative and decolonial effort, a multi-stakeholder approach to doing this. Last slide. And so these are some of the, as I mentioned, groups, and currently our own, the Women's Major Group, but as well as there's a Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights and Climate Justice Coalition that work on these issues and work to unite civil society to advocate towards UN processes and in their own member states towards making sure that more policies, that policies are robust, that more policies are implemented, but also making sure that the current frameworks that we have around protecting the vulnerable lives of girls, women, and gender diverse people in climate disasters are implemented on a national scale. So I think I will end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. We're running really short on time, so I would ask the next two speakers to please be as brief as possible. I will also cut short your presentation. So next we'll listen to Ms. 𝗲𝗲𝗃𝗃, co-founder and now advisor of the Akani Vision Limited based in Lusaka, Zambia. Go ahead. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Lusaka, Zambia. We're so happy to be here with you today. My name is 𝗲𝗲𝗃𝗃, and together I'm here together with my colleague, Musonda Kapena.
Hello, everybody. Pleased to meet everybody.
Musonda, would you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay, so I'm the co-founder of Namfumu Conservation Trust, and our trust has an ethos of looking at how indigenous knowledge can be monetized, especially that the women in most rural areas of Zambia and globally are the custodians of indigenous knowledge systems. We know that they've practiced sustainable forest harvesting for their cosmetics, their foods, their medicines, their mushrooms and all. And we have had a lot of interaction across Zambia and within the region. And with this, would like to share how this discussion contributes, or how we can actually contribute to that 30 years after Beijing. Thank you, Bidemi.
So we're going to have a discussion with each other, because one of my favorite things to do is to interact with Musonda. She has a wealth of knowledge about what's going on in Zambia in the field of natural resource management. And so one of the things I wanted her to start with is just to give us a bit of a spotlight on Zambia and the natural resources that we have here.
Okay, so in Zambia, we have 74 tribes, and most of these have the common ethos that women are the custodians of indigenous knowledge. So the landscape of Zambia is primarily based on the natural forest heritage. We have a lot of natural resources, and even if we may not live in the most luxurious houses in the rural areas, the rural woman suffers the brunt of provision on the table, while the men are the ones that look at the forest as a cash cow, looking at charcoal and looking at high value timbers. Like the mukula tree was highly exploited a few years ago, not because of its timber value, but because of its naturopathical value. And this value has been our heritage for a long time, yet we were not able to monetize it because the women have this knowledge, but the men were looking at the timber value and not the other values of it.
So I read somewhere that charcoal makes up 87% of the demand on energy that we need to heat our homes, make food. What's going on with that? Why am I seeing charcoal everywhere when we're talking about protecting our environment, protecting our trees.
Mhm.
Of course, we know that we were hit by a drought the past couple of rainy seasons. We haven't had the best rains,
Yeah.
but still, shouldn't we have a situation where we have less and less charcoal being sold, not only within the communities in rural areas, but perhaps beyond? What I see is that when I drive between different towns in Zambia, there's charcoal being sold on the road in huge, huge, huge bales.
Okay.
Please explain that.
So the charcoal issue is a very political issue, but it's also a very sustenance issue. The men that rely on charcoal in the communities are trying to provide for their families. But hell and behold, if we only extracted charcoal enough for our communities and the country, we wouldn't have the levels of deforestation that we have. And currently, Zambia is suffering the brunt of loss of about 3,000 hectares of forest land per year, and that's a lot. So the thing is that we have a lot of economic aspects where currently Zambia has load shedding against electricity. So everybody relies on cooking on charcoal. This is the cold season. They are warming themselves with charcoal. But believe it or not, our charcoal, if we were able to tag it, goes as far as South Africa and North Africa. So if we were only producing charcoal for our country, we wouldn't have so much. And also, I think some of our colleagues on the panels previously spoke about how the extractive industry is consistently eating into the forest resources. It's affecting the women because all they want is the mushroom. All they want is the software out of the forest. Their herbs and their oils and their edible insects and all. These are our cultural heritage. And so what Namfumu has done is we tap into that and try to put more money in the hand of the old woman. But hell and behold, the man that has sold the charcoal and the timber still asks for that money back. And that creates a conflict where GBV is enhanced.
So you're saying that we're facing disagreements not only within maybe a household and a community, but even beyond. What happens when we have extractive industries being interested in that same forest?
Well, they take it. They take the forest because the old woman out there in Eastern Province, 𝗕𝗲𝗃𝗃 chiefdom, for example, she has no say. She will say, I need the forest for my cultural heritage, for my nutrition, for all these other uses, including the water resource and the soils. But then her voice is not heard because the money is coming in from the bigger commercial initiatives, which at government level, they would say, and there are laws to it, that anything under the ground belongs to the state. So we're just looking at the forest and looking at how we will continue to live in the area. But documents are signed which we are not consulted on. And the next thing we find bulldozers in our communities coming to say, this is now our land, move. And in most cases, the amount of compensation for relocating a whole community cannot be moneyfied because where will my grandfather's grave go? That has a lot of spiritual ancestral significance, which you just can't pay for. It doesn't have a dollar sign to it.
So I can see that you're bringing a lot of the things that were discussed during this session already into the Zambian context. And for me, I'm hearing that 30 years after Beijing, right, we still have a lot of work to do. Where is that woman in the African forest who has been, utilizing the forest for mushrooms, for herbs, healing, the things that heal her family, that nurture her family? Where is she at this platform? Of course, we have the agents of change who are here with us. We have those of us who are also trying to push to make sure that we bring these issues to the forefront and make them more human, more focused. But I hear two things, if I may conclude.
Yes, you may.
The first is that we have a conflict at the household level. We have that woman who's in competition with her own partner or husband, or perhaps other members of her family and her community in terms of the use of the forest, right? And then the second issue we have is that the community is facing, the big picture people, those who are coming in to extract from the forest, as we've noted from other presentations today, and how these opportunities are not really viable for the women because they're not brought to the table, right? I would imagine that many of those women don't even get to hear or to have their voices heard.
They're not consulted at all.
They're not consulted. So these are realities that we're facing here in Zambia, and I think in many, many other countries, because I think the discussion around gender equality happens more in our urban areas. So we want to highlight how important it is to bring these discussions further into the countryside, into our villages. So in both of these instances, I believe we need to find culturally viable ways to ensure that women are at the table, that we're consulted, not only at a high political level, but also within the various communities. We hope we didn't use too much time. Thank you so much.
And I just want to close. There's an African adage: if you don't know where you're going, stop and look back where you've come from. Often the lessons are in our past, because 30 years ago, we were able to sustain our forests. We would have sustainable harvesting. But right now, it's all up in the cloud. And that grandmother in the village has no clue what is happening at cloud level. All she wants is the basic needs and her cultural comforts for her to be happy. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you, Ms. 𝗲𝗲𝗃𝗃 and Ms. 𝗬𝗲𝗃𝗲𝗿. Very interesting to hear from both of you, and very interesting to that discussion, isn't it? The format. To close, we have a few minutes to give to 𝗕𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗏 to make a closing remark.
Excellency Ambassador, thank you so much, and thank you so much to all our colleagues who presented quite interesting insights of their experiences and what they are thinking about, what need is, what we have to do and what is needed to do. I have attentively listened to all your comments and presentations, and frankly spoken, I think the key is consciousness, improving consciousness about climate change, about women's rights, and especially about the importance to have climate action, bridging it with other important topics such as climate justice and gender and all other requirements that are needed to bring justice, especially for women and girls. And I thank very much Her Excellency and especially also 𝗲𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗏 that they organized such an event to bridge these topics such as climate change and issues related to gender, especially girls and women. And frankly spoken, I'm always amazed about the engagement of non-governmental institutions and organizations, and especially young women that I see here on the screen who are extremely engaged on these topics. Thank you so much. And I hope to see as many as possible also within the UNFCCC process, because to listen to that what you have presented, to listen to that what you have already experienced, and what you can advise us, so-called parties or officials or policymakers, is really of utmost importance. And I hope to see you quite soon, whether here in Vienna or somewhere else. And please continue in your engagement for climate justice, for women's rights, to protect girls and women in their efforts to be on service for their peoples. So thank you again. And I hope we will continue to do so, Miro. What do you think?
I agree, yeah.
Thank you so much.
The world needs us.
Thank you.
Let me just close by saying that commemorating the Beijing's anniversary must be more than a celebration of a remarkable achievement of the past. It should be a catalyst for transformative action moving forward. Together we can shape the future where environmental sustainability goes hand in hand with safety, dignity, and equal justice for all. So thank you so much for all our speakers, and thank you to everyone that joined in today in this side event for your valuable inputs to this discussion. Good afternoon to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
And maybe one thing, last thing to the speakers, maybe you can stay a bit so we can take a picture with you in the background with the speakers who are present in the room. And then we have a picture.
That would be
Like
nice. Yeah.
It just will take like 1 or 2 minutes. I saw it's very good and then you have to leave, but it's only 2 minutes. I hope that's okay.
Yeah. No, Friday morning. It's
Please.
also related to climate. Yes. From Finland. Yeah, okay. You have to.
Okay, thanks. Do you want to see? I see. And also sit. Maybe stand on the side. Yeah, let's stand on the side. Yeah.
Kommt ihr nicht da?
Veronica, will you join us? And I will make a list.
Sorry. It's fine. Yeah.
Everybody okay here?
Thank you.
Oh, beautiful people, thanks for the cooperativeness.
Thank you very much.
Just inform us that on Friday, related to climate change.
Ah, yeah, really?
Related to how it's related to gender-based violence.
Super, thank